I was sitting in my 8th grade classroom in Ames, Iowa, just a week after my 14th birthday, which was May 3rd, 1970. My attention was out the window, looking south to Lincoln Way, the main thoroughfare that cut the town into north and south, US Highway 30, the Lincoln Highway. My attention was often out the window, but on this day I was watching as a few thousand protesters were marching from the Iowa State campus toward downtown and the Selective Service Office, marching right past my Catholic grade school. They were marching to protest the war in Vietnam, and this was a particularly volatile and tense time because the week before, on May 4th, 9 students had been wounded and 4 killed at Kent State University when National Guard troops opened fire on unarmed student protesters. It was during this period in my life when I began paying attention to social justice and the nonviolent resistance. I began reading and learning about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who had just been assassinated 2 years earlier. I learned about the courage and integrity it takes to work for nonviolent change and some of what Dr. King experienced. After receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, Dr. King said he felt obligated to extend his work outside the realm of civil rights and began to speak out on issues of war, poverty, and racial injustice. On April 4th, 1967, Dr. King delivered his historic anti-war speech at the Riverside Church in New York City. There was a price to pay for speaking out, though. Reaction to his speech was immediate. The Washington Post wrote, "Dr. King has diminished his usefulness to his cause, this country, and to his people." A Life magazine editorial stated, "Much of his speech was a demagogic slander that sounded like a script for Radio Hanoi." It was not just white America reacting negatively. Also publicly expressing disagreement with Dr. King were Senator Edward Brooke, the only African American in the Senate, Ray Wilkins, the executive director of the NAACP, Whitney Young Jr. of the Urban League, and Dr. Ralph Bunche, the first black Nobel Prize winner. Regardless of how it affected his personal life or the civil rights movement, Dr. King knew that to be true to his conscience, he had to speak out. That is what integrity looks like. Dr. King stated that he felt he must become personally involved in the effort to change the jangling discords of war into meaningful rhythms of negotiation and peace. King stated that he was an American and that he equated love of country with love of democracy, justice, and peace. Exactly 1 year after that Riverside speech, April 4th, 1968, Dr. King would be assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Paraphrasing Dr. King, "The ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of convenience, but where they stand in moments of challenge, moments of great controversy and great crisis." Thank you, Dr. King. I've been marching in the 60 years since. We light our chalice flame with these words. May it light within us hearts of compassion, minds of justice, actions of wisdom, lives of service and integrity, and souls of awe and wonder at the beauty of this life, of this world. After the vigil for the Charleston Church massacre, what if we build a God out of justice? If we prayed for justice to lead our daily actions before scrambled eggs and coffee, if we tithed to justice, dated only people who believe in the right justice, got our knees dirty kneeling on asphalt in front of police stations and banks, praying for justice to banish the infidels. What if we worshiped justice as much as comfort, didn't move our protest lines when the cab drivers honked? What if after the vigil, nobody asked if people wanted to do a die-in, if it wasn't perhaps too late? What if we asked Justice what she would do to the town tonight? What if Justice says we need more cowbells, more pots and pans, more yell in our lily-white liberal mouths? What if Justice says she doesn't even need us, checking our cell phones on the crowd's periphery as a black woman talks about fear? An excerpt from what would Gwendolyn Brooks do? Gwendolyn Brooks was the first African American to receive the Pulitzer Prize in 1950, and she was the U.S. Poet Laureate in the 1980s. I stand before my routine reflection, button up my sanity. I ready myself once again for mourning and mortify. Stacking poetry and bills in a knapsack, I bundle up hope. It's brutal out there. For a moment, I stand with ghosts and the framed ancestors surrounding me. I call out, hoping she can hear me over the day-breaking sirens, hoping she's not far away or right down the street, praying over another dead black boy. How will we make it through this, Miss Brooks? Hold on. I know she was earshot and fingertip close to oppression. She saw how hateful hate could be. She raised babies, taught Stone Rangers, grew a natural, and wrote around critics. She won a Pulitzer Prize in the dark. She justified our kitchenette dreams and held on. She held on to all of us. Hold on, she whispers. Another day when I have to tiptoe around the police and passive-aggressive emails from people who sit only a few feet from me. I have to act like it so I can keep my job. Be a team player, pay taxes on it. Otherwise, I'm just part of the problem, a rebel-rouser and rude. Hold on. Did you see that, Miss Brooks? Do you see what we've become? They are skinning our histories, deporting our roots, detonating our very right to tell the truth. We are one step closer to annihilation. Hold on, she says, 2 million light years away. She's right. Hold on, everybody. Hold on because the poets are still alive and writing. Hold on to the last of the disappearing bees and that great barrier reef. Hold on to the one sitting next to you, not masked behind some keyboard. The ones who live and love right next to you. Hold on to them. And when we bury another grandmother or another black boy, when we stand in front of a pipeline, pour another dirty glass of drinking water and put it on the dining room table, next to the crepe block, bratwurst, tamales, collards, and dumplings that our foremothers and fathers, immigrants, brought with them so that we all knew where we came from, somewhere that mattered. When we kneel on rubbled mosques, sit in massacred prayer circles, holding on is what gets us through. We must remember who we are. We are worth fighting for. We've seen beauty. We've tasted empathy and paid it forward. We've go-funded from wrong to right. We've marched and made love. We haven't forgotten, even if they have. Karma is keeping watch. Hold on. Hold on, everybody. Even if all you have left is that middle finger around your God-given right to be free, to be heard, to be loved and remembered, hold on and keep holding on.
Thinking and teaching about race takes up a significant space in my life. And still, I struggle with how I should enter those very spaces of race and privilege and power. And I wonder, even as I enter this pulpit today, do I do enough racial justice work to take this space on MLK Sunday? Is a white woman an appropriate speaker on a day that celebrates the social justice work of a black man and the black community? I've reflected on these at length, and I'm afraid I don't have a very profound answer other than I think this is important work, and working for racial justice is the right thing to do. It's very difficult to look at the bigger picture right now without despairing. But it's not just those who are the most extreme racists that make me despair, but so many of us white folk with good intentions have a lot of work to do as well. Most Americans, when asked, believe in racial equality, want to support it, will say that living or working in diverse communities is beneficial, and yet, though progress has been made in the legal realm, we still face enormous racial justice issues in our country. We collectively are not living our values. For example, and relevant to my job as a college teacher, students of color, Black students, Latinx students, students who are from or whose ancestry is from Southeast Asia, still face barriers to entering college, achieving good grades, and graduating in ways that are not faced by white students. Even when controlling for financial issues and preparedness, important issues in their own right for sure, racial differences still emerge. Sense of belonging to a campus affects both student performance and graduation rates. And to have this sense of belonging, students on college campuses, students of color must navigate this additional layer of race and racial inequality. Even at my institution, where we've made gains reducing these disparities, speaking with these students of color reveals that they face racism on campus in many forms, from more overt forms like other students using racial slurs, to much more subtle issues like offhand comments by white students, perhaps even meant to be compliments, that nonetheless these students of color find dispiriting or in fact puts them or their race down. Most of these comments and actions from people around them whose intention is to be nice to them or who profess to value equality and diversity. And this is an enormous challenge. How do you convince individuals to do the painful work of looking at one's own life, one's own actions, and owning up to the truth that maybe we don't always live up to our own values? That though we truly believe in the value of diversity and racial equality, we sometimes still act in ways that undermine those efforts. I definitely have made mistakes. There have been times when I should have supported my colleagues of color more, or I should have spoken up differently, or in some cases at all. And looking back and reflecting on these requires deep humility and a requirement that we face some uncomfortable truths. In my own family, my son is Black. He was born here in Minnesota. Both his birth parents were Somali. So part of my life is also being a parent to a Black adolescent, and that brings a whole host of challenges for a white woman. And because of him, I have this different relationship to the Black community and the Somali community. I'm invested in those communities differently than many white people are. And it's challenging, trying to help him navigate through issues that I never dealt with, being called or hearing racial slurs, and as he gets closer to being a Black man, how to stay safe in the community, in stores, while driving. Our theme of the month is integrity. And I value racial equality, but do I live those values? Perhaps a better question is, do I live them well enough? But even for that watered down question, I'm not sure I have a good answer. I've made a lot of choices in my life that have given me opportunities to engage with these issues. I teach sociology courses, so I have the advantage of being able to assign readings to people and then test them over those readings. I try to cover racial justice issues and racial issues in a direct way without sugarcoating inequality. I have them read voices of people of color. I also do research looking at diversity in higher education. What barriers are faced by students of color? What supports seem to help them the most and help them be successful? I've also been involved in the sanctuary movement for immigration justice here, though that's mostly in a waiting pattern if someone seeks our welcome. In social media, I try to consume work from an array of people of color, listen to them, and believe them. But as a white person, I understand I have white privilege, and that's very difficult to see clearly, even though I've read extensively about it, and even though I have not just a Black friend, but a Black son. There's never a point where that work within oneself is done, that you can say, now I'm not racist, so now I don't have to think about it anymore. And maybe that is something that all of us can do. To think about the spaces we inhabit in our lives, those places where we have or don't have power, thinking about our own identity or those we are in relationship with. Think about how race and ethnicity and discrimination take up space in our own lives and in our own communities, and why sometimes it's so hard to face or acknowledge that it does take this space, and that it's even harder to fix. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." And I do believe that collectively we must keep moving forward. So we ask the questions to which we have no easy answers. We act when we can act, and when we can't, we keep thinking about how to move forward, how to make our life an answer to the question of how to live our values.
The time is always right to do what is right, said the Reverend Dr. King. This is a sentiment I've heard in many different forms in my life, this invitation into integrity, treating people with kindness and compassion, entering the world with justice and equality. One of the earliest ways I heard it was from my family. When you pray, move your feet. Or in other words, that the religious or the spiritual life is not just meant to make you feel good, but it's meant to be a motivator, to do good in the world. Prayer was a way to center myself, but also to strengthen my resolve that to love God meant loving your neighbor, which was everyone. Another form of that phrase in a different context was from my first real employer, Mr. Ron. He was the custodian for years at the elementary school in Eagle Lake, Minnesota, where I worked for several summers. And he would often say, if you're going to do something, do it right. Most of the time, it was a reprimand of me not doing something very well under his care. Not cutting corners in this world, he would say, if you're going to do something, you take the time to do it right and do it well. You got to flip the desk all the way over. You have to have a putty knife in your pocket at all times to scrape the gum off it and the grime and the dirt. And then he would scoff at the district lawn crew who would come by, in his words, and just scare the grass by going too quickly. So a major part of our work on the custodial crew there was cleaning bathrooms, as you might imagine. And he would say, no dry cleaning, Luke. And he'd grab the toilet brush and say, this isn't a magic wand. You've got to use water and soap, and you've got to work it to get it to do what it needs to do. You got to put some muscle into this work. How true about toilets, about anything, really. There are no magic wands, and this world has plenty of grime and grease that is often not attended to well. It was such a good lesson in the most simple, tangible task that you have to do things right if they're going to be done well. You have to do something that takes intention and time and effort for it to have any lasting quality. You have to get in there and you really got to work at it. The work of Reverend Dr. King is alive and well, and people are and have been working, and it is messy, and it is complicated. And we often ignore the grime and mess as a culture that lies just under the surface, implicit bias, internalized prejudice, and white supremacy that as a culture we often are not aware of or we dismiss so quickly. And if you think you've cleaned something up as a culture, we tend to think we have, but you really didn't do it well, and often it just keeps getting worse. To build the beloved community, we've got to really ask some hard questions and pay attention to hard statistics and listen deeply to hard stories. This work is not easy, and sometimes all you can do, at least all I can do, is start asking the questions that have no easy answers. Start living the answers the best I know how. Balance in my heart the humanity of everybody, but even more so balance in my soul those on the margins, those without structural power, learning from stories that are often untold as I go, knowing that the voices and stories of those on the margins need to be moved more and more to the center. This isn't a spectator on the periphery, cell phone loitering invitation, as the poet writes. It's an invitation at the core of our country, at the core of our moral compass, dwelling in some of the most uncomfortable conversations sometimes, asking us over and over again if we're willing to say yes, if we're willing to show up, even if we're not sure what showing up really might mean or ask of us. If we're willing to question our own biases and question the assumed goodness or morality in our systems of government or criminal justice. The work is hard. To try to see beneath the surface of things, to pay attention to the untold stories and do our own work of how we benefit or don't benefit from structures of privilege, of what we allow to be casually said by a friend or a relative or a coworker without question because it's too uncomfortable to question. Sometimes my own Minnesota niceness, my preference for equanimity and harmony, those things that I'm sure were essential in my Scandinavian DNA to survive the long winters in a small cabin, that you just got to get along, don't ruffle any feathers, don't rock the boat. Sometimes that gets in the way of this gritty work. Those hard questions that I need to ask myself or that I need to ask others. Sometimes a question as simply as, "What do you mean by that?" is the hardest question to ask. But it's an invitation. It's something I hear over and over, that you can break open and cut through some of the complexity by just asking that. What do you mean by that when you say that? About whatever's happening in the news, about this story of racial discrimination, about this structural problem. What do you mean when you say that? And other times it's beyond just the simple questions. It's affirming that anger is an important part of this work. The middle finger anger that the poet speaks of as an appropriate response to unquestioned empire that keeps locking up and brutalizing or soul-wounding brown and black communities. Sometimes you have to agitate things a little bit. You really got to get in there if you're going to get the grime out. As Frederick Douglass wrote, those who profess to favor freedom yet depreciate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground, who want rain without thunder and lightning, who want the ocean without the roar of its waters and its power. Too often Dr. King gets pacified, but he was a social radical. He was using tactics that disrupted everything, disrupted the status quo, disrupted society, that made what he called white moderates become quite uncomfortable. Those who were more devoted to order than to justice, he wrote, who didn't agree with tactics even if they agreed with the cause. Making this world better is not comfortable most of the time. And we don't do this work alone. In fact, we can't. Sometimes the only way to get enough of us to travel up the mountain is to ask each other to join in the work, whatever it happens to be at that moment. I went up to the mountain because you asked me to. Who has asked us into the work? How are we asking others into the work? So we sing the songs in solidarity and hope, and we join the work in whatever way we can, and we remember we are all still on our way, that nobody is free until we are all free. Hold on, writes Pernisha Jones, because the poets are still alive, she says, and writing. Even if all you have left is that middle finger around your God-given right to be free, to be heard, to be loved and remembered, hold on. And keep holding.